Game number 10 of the FIDE World Chess Championship. Ding has the white pieces. He is down one game in the match, and he goes for the English. We see knight c3, e5, knight f3, knight c6, e4. So this is kind of like a king-pawn opening, but we have the extra move, pawn to c4 by white. Bishop c5. Most players have been playing bishop to b4, but we still have over 1,000 games in the database with this move, bishop c5. Now, there's this cool little tactical trick, and you can remember this for your own games. This works sometimes in the king-pawn openings, as well as this position out of the English. You sacrifice the knight, and when the knight takes back, you have this move d4, forking two minor pieces. And this is a way that you can sometimes get an advantage right out of the opening against your opponents. After bishop b4, takes, queen to f3 is played. This has been a trendy move over the last 5 or 6 years. But we've reached essentially an equal position. It's a very slight advantage for Ding. If you factor in the space, Ding has the advantage, but if you factor in the pawn structure, Jan is going to have the advantage. Because after knight takes c3, pawn takes, and the bishop retreats, white has 2 pawn islands on the queen side, and these c-pawns are not only doubled pawns, they're also isolated pawns. So those are extremely weak pawns long term. And we're down to 36 games here. But what Ding has going for him is after queen to g3, we reach an interesting decision by Jan. The queen attacks the pawn on g7. Castling here is a bad move. Bishop to g5 or bishop to h6 can both be played, and white gets a big attack. So what do you play after queen to g3? Most players are playing pawn to g6. And this was played 24 times in the position, but white gets a clear advantage after pawn to g6. So Jan finds an excellent move here. He plays king to f8. That's the best move on the board. Jan loses castling, so we might be in for some more excitement. Bishop e2, d6. If Jan can get his pieces out quickly, those doubled pawns are going to be a weakness in the endgame, and Jan could play for the advantage. So bishop f4 by Ding. He's kind of looking at trying to trade e-pawn for d-pawn. And the reason he wants to do that is because if he can castle and get his rooks on the open files, that's going to be a way that he can attack the black king. So look for Ding to try to trade these 2 pawns off soon. Queen e7 by Jan, rook to d1, active play, e takes d6, still a threat. And interestingly here, we are following a game where Ian Nepomniachtchi had the white pieces. So he's black in this position. He had the white pieces back in 2020 against a player named Cardosa. So kind of interesting that they're following a game with colors reversed from Jan. h5 played. This was also in that game. What happens here if Ding goes for the free pawn? E takes d6. Well, now there's c takes d6, and after the pieces start swapping off, bishop to f5 can be played. And here, even though Ding is up a pawn, like we talked about, it's the doubled isolated pawn, and now rook to c8 is ready to put a rook right on that file, and the advantage here is very small for Ding. So he could have gone for this, but the advantage is still very small. And in the game, he has a very small advantage as well. So he castles, h4 by Jan, and then g5. Jan is playing aggressive. Again, I love the fighting play. He wants the initiative. He's got his rook on the h file, his bishop pointing at f2, his other bishop over here. Jan's going for the attack with his king on f8. Now we see e takes d6 by Ding, and after pawn takes, here there's a choice. You could retreat the bishop back to e3, or you can take the pawn on d6. Ding decided to take the pawn on d6, but this was questioned both by the commentary team and by Arena Crush in the post-game press conference. They were wondering, why didn't Ding go for bishop to e3? And I think they were assuming after bishop takes e3, f takes e3, Ding gets this extra play with the queens both on the board. But I think Jan had something else in mind. After bishop to e3, there's this cool move, pawn to h3, trying to soften up this pawn structure in front of Ding's king. And now, if taking on c5, take on c5, g3, there's bishop to e6. And even though you could play f4 here, I think there's enough counterplay with this king now being exposed. The pawn's up, this h-pawn is in the area, that Jan could play a move like bishop to e8. And all of a sudden, this is kind of a double-edged game. Like maybe Jan is going for some winning chances. So that's probably a better line for Ding to play for the win, just considering that the queens are on the board still. He decides to go for this. Bishop takes d6, and this forces off the queens. And he probably thought he could try to apply a little bit of pressure here because he's still up a pawn. He's holding that pawn for now. And he said in the post-game press conference the reason he went for that trade is because he still knew he had f4, opening up the rook. And it's kind of on Jan to prove that this is still a draw. Ding is going to pressure him a bit. King to e7 played. The rook drops back. And now f5, f6 check is a big threat. So Jan finds the only good move. G takes f4. And after rook takes, Ding here still has a slight advantage, and he's going to try to make Jan mess up. h3, g4. Ding is up a pawn. And now let's fast forward a few moves. So the players are each trying to improve their positions. And at this point, so rook to e4 was just played. It pins the bishop to the king. Rook to d5 is a cool move here. And if the rook retreats, pawn to c5. And in that case, Ding is able to trade off one of the doubled isolated pawns for a healthy pawn on black's side. Jan spots this, king to f8. We're at move 28, and the players have plenty of time on the clocks. So check, bring the rook over to a8. This is something we can learn in our own games. When you have like a rook and pawn endgame, always keep your rooks as active as possible. So you would rather have a rook attacking a pawn than defending a pawn. So of course, Jan is going to look to do the same thing, and he plays rook to c5. Makes his rook active, creates this double attack. Rook takes a7, bishop takes, rook comes over, and rook c6. And at this point, Jan is pretty much going to win the c pawn no matter what. And Ding is going to win the h pawn. So we're trading pawn for pawn, but Ding is still up one pawn. The computer says this is essentially a dead draw. At lower depths, it'll give white just a very, very tiny edge, but at deeper depths, it knows that it's equal with best play. Rook to e5. Now, at this point, Ding is content to trade rooks. We're on move 33. The game goes to move 45, so 12 more moves. About half of those 12 moves, the players play in 30 seconds each. The other half of those 12 moves, the players play in 0 seconds. They blitzed out the moves, and this is a talent of grandmasters. Both players here knew the position was going to be a draw, and there's a lot of rules nowadays where you shouldn't agree to a draw too soon and so on. The players are really skilled at finding the quickest draws possible. So Jan plays bishop to b3, allowing the bishop to be captured, but forking white back in the end. So Ding is forked. That bishop's going to be captured. Rook to b5. So here you cannot take the rook. That would be losing for black. So Jan plays rook to a3, trade. And then after f5, takes and rook here, this pawn is going to drop. So we're either getting a rook and pawn against rook, which is going to be a draw, or a king and pawn against king with just a rook pawn, which is going to be a draw. So the players trade this off, and then look at the last move by Ding. He just says, here's the pawn, it's a draw. King takes h5, draw agreed. So this is 3 draws in a row, and 2 of them, when Ding had the white pieces, were 45 move draws. We only have 4 games left. Ding is down a point. Let's see in the coming days if he's able to fight back and create more winning chances. He lost a valuable game with white today, so he only has 2 games with white remaining. But we will have recaps of all the remaining games. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next recap.